Hello, everyone. Welcome to Browns Insider, another Wednesday night. Tom Reed joining us this week, as well as Bud Shaw joining us for the first time here on Browns Insider, getting you ready for the Browns and Texans. But first, guys, let's live in the past a little bit, because that win over Cincinnati was really a win, at least to this point, for Mike Pettine and his coaching staff. We're about a week removed from it. Tom, are you kind of still sensing that the team is riding a little high from that win?
I think they've kind of come down. They had a few days to come down from it, but obviously it's a win that's caught everyone's attention, especially nationally. Today at practice, there were a couple national guys that actually weren't there to talk to Johnny Manziel. So the team's starting to get some publicity nationally, and they're ready for the second half here now.
But I mean, obviously we have to see how the rest of the season plays out. But just kind of right now, what does that win mean?
Well, I think it means, like Tom said, it brought national attention, but I also think it meant something in that locker room. I mean, you don't usually get this circumstance where a team has played 3 games against really subpar opponents and didn't look all that great, while they were playing them. So I think it was kind of, even though those guys say, hey, they know it's all about just winning in the National Football League and all that stuff, blah, 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 I mean, some things mean more. And that was a huge, huge win.
Is that part of, I mean, getting people outside of Cleveland to stop thinking about the Browns as essentially the Clippers of the NFL? Is that really the big step that Mike Pettine and this coaching staff need to take? And is maybe this, and again, with that caveat, we have to see how the rest of the season plays out. Is this kind of that first step to maybe getting there?
I think beating the Steelers at home was a step that fans around here were so tired of hearing about losing to Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah.
And then I think it's step by step. But this was another one. This was the team that couldn't win on the road in the division. Usually can't win anywhere on the road, but not in the division. They hadn't won there in years. And to come out and not just win, but just absolutely play so well on both sides of the ball, that was a statement game, I think.
When you mention living in the past, right? Nobody does it better than fans in this town.
That's true.
For good reason. I think a lot of people thought back to that I'm not saying they thought during the game, but I think the context was that 2007 game when they were actually a pretty good team with a chance to make the playoffs. They went to Cincinnati and they lay a huge egg. I think a lot of people were convinced that maybe this was going to be the same kind of scenario where they come out losing maybe decisively and then having to pick themselves up again. Now they're riding as high as I've seen them in 7 years.
We've kind of danced around it on this show and in other areas, Tom, that word playoffs. It was not really, you kind of thought about it, but again, you were talking about them beating Oakland and Tampa, and then they had that loss to Jacksonville too. But now that they are sitting alone in first place in their division, they're 9 games into the season, do you start to say not making the playoffs would be a disappointment, or is it still too early for that?
Well, no. I mean, they're absolutely legitimate contenders at this point. Now, the division is still pretty bunched up, and the thing that will be interesting is now that they have kind of put themselves into this first place perch, can they hold on? These are the games that then become really meaningful. And let's be honest with you, they're the only team in this division in the last 3 years that really hasn't played meaningful games late in the year. All the other teams have had to win games. They know how to win games. And we'll see if guys like, the veterans that were brought in here, Carlos Dansby, guys like Whitner, can they help get this team over the hump and get them into the playoffs?
I was driving back Friday from Cincinnati and did a radio show in Cincinnati. And right at the end of it, the guy just hit me with a question, well, who's going to win this division? And I just blurted out Baltimore. And I have no idea why I did, other than habit and knowing that they've been there in the end. The more I thought about it, well, they do have a game in hand against the Browns. They also have that game at home late in the season that should matter. But you start to look at this team in this division this year and you start thinking, well, why not? Why not the Browns this time?
Yeah, and this is a really strange division. At this point, it is just kind of blurt out whatever comes to mind first, who's going to win this division. Because, Pittsburgh was playing so well. After they lost to the Browns, they started to play well, and then they go and lose to the Jets. Baltimore got off to a really good start. Cincinnati got off to a great start.
Well, it was funny because when I said that, his reaction was, well, that would be a surprise in this town because we've beaten them twice.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, well, you can pretty much say that. Each team can look at the other teams in this division now and say, well, why can't I beat them?
Yeah,
And that's
exactly.
never been the case here.
And of course, the Browns still have one more against Cincinnati and one more against Baltimore. All right, let's get to, actually, let's talk about the kind of mini bye that the Browns have had as well. What benefit do you guys think that has for this team, especially with Jordan Cameron still dealing with concussion issues? We find out Tashawn Gibson is going through the concussion protocol. So, Bud, what is the benefit of this mini bye?
Well, I don't know if it'll be enough to get those two
Yeah.
guys into the lineup Sunday, but I think in general, I don't think they really liked having that early bye in this season, and a lot of teams wouldn't, knowing that they faced this long grind. So coming off a win on a Thursday night like that and having those 9 days and playing a team that is probably better than its record shows,
Yeah.
I think are all pretty big things.
Yeah, I would agree. I think just allows you to kind of reset yourself, ground yourself. We remember they didn't necessarily handle after the big win against Pittsburgh, didn't play necessarily that well. Guys, I was talking to Desmond Bryant yesterday, just said they didn't think that they were able to match Jacksonville's want to win. And they think that may have been a lesson, but also just having a couple days to come down from the euphoria of that huge victory.
And it does get you away from that grind, too, that week in and week out grind. It allows guys, this may be a different discussion if they go out and lay an egg against Houston, but it allows guys to go to Vegas if they want to go to Vegas and actually have
How many guys did that?
I don't know, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, the Texans may be coming off a bye too.
Yes, I
Yes,
believe
yes.
So
so.
they're both kind of coming off a little bit.
Which you would think would be an advantage for the Texans, but yet when you're going in with a new quarterback,
Yeah.
it probably would be more to their advantage for this to be his second game.
Yeah, so let's talk about that new quarterback since you brought it up. And it was funny before we came back here, ESPN is touting this as the battle between former Brady backups. Ryan Mallett is going to get his first career start against the Browns. That's usually an advantage for the team the quarterback is starting against. And of course, Ryan Mallett, while he's known for his arm, maybe not known for his mobility. So can the Browns take advantage of that, Tom?
Yeah, you would think so. You'd think that would be a big edge. The one thing Pettin couched today was that, even as a backup in New England, he has spent several years prepping against Pettin's defense when he was in Buffalo, and I can't remember how many years back, but maybe with the Jets as well. So he does know the defense pretty well. But you'd have to think it's an advantage for the Browns. Anytime you're starting for the first time, I know he's not a rookie, but it still has to be advantage Browns, I would think.
Yeah, do you think, can the Browns take advantage of that?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, I understand what Tom's saying with him prepping for the Browns. Sometimes until you get out there and you actually see it. I thought the major component to that win Thursday in Cincinnati was how confused Dalton looked in trying to figure out what they were doing defensively, and I think that's probably a pretty promising sign for Sunday.
And this defense has improved dramatically. Maybe not a lot of people had noticed until Cincinnati, but this defense has been getting slowly better and better. They're still very vulnerable against the run, and they're going to get tested on Sunday, but we're seeing them force turnovers. We're seeing the point totals go down. There are marked improvements out there.
Yeah, I do think, though, that this matchup causes them some issues, and one is Arian Foster, obviously. The other is the want to win you talked about with Jacksonville. I think it's called J.J. Watt on this team. And Brian Hoyer, I think, not to get off topic here, but in the game against Jacksonville when he struggled, I think it was because he didn't seem to be able to get his feet set. They were putting a lot of pressure on him. That defensive front really made things difficult. I think he's going to run into that same kind of a defense this time.
Yeah, and then the whole idea with going back to Arian Foster, if he has success against the Browns running game, one thing that will do, even if he doesn't get in the end zone, will shorten the game and make it more of a low-scoring game. And again, lead you into this whole idea where one or two mistakes could really swing the outcome of potentially a low-scoring game.
Yeah, and these are a couple teams that have played close games that could have gone either way. I mean, you could be looking at two teams that, a play here or there are in opposite situations. You kind of flip it a little bit.
Yeah, the Texans, I think, are among the league leaders, if not leading the league in takeaways. Also high up or at the bottom of the league, I should say, in big chunk plays. I mean, they're getting burned at times, too, and we all know that. We used to think we would talk about Brian Hoyer as a game manager at this point, right? Well, I'm not sure he's that. I mean, he's got more plays over 20 yards than I would have ever suspected going into this season without Josh Gordon.
And we got to see him against Cincinnati deal with a really difficult situation weather-wise, too. I mean, the wind was blowing in that stadium. It was maybe a little hard to tell in the press box, a little hard to tell on TV, but you saw the goalposts rattling. You saw the punts that kind of just stalled. in midair. That was really the first time we've had to see him deal with those types of conditions, and he seemed to handle them well.
The Browns would be better off if punts stalled in midair.
That's true, yeah.
They wouldn't have to either field them or return them.
Right.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt that.
No, exactly right. And it was kind of the return of the running game for the Browns. They got the running game going. And, when he doesn't have to throw the ball 40 times a game, he's been just really effective. I'm okay with the term. It's weird. He's a game manager, but a game manager that makes big plays.
That's not a bad combination.
It's not a bad combination. And as long as this team can run the ball, I think I don't want to say perfect, but he's a very good quarterback for this offense.
Absolutely.
All right, Tom, you gave us our segue. Ben Tate had some interesting remarks yesterday. At times, it kind of felt like he didn't want to answer the questions and was trying not to, and then he would sort of passive-aggressively answer something. What did you think as Ben Tate was talking yesterday?
It doesn't necessarily surprise me. Again, just given the whole scope of the history of this guy, the fact that he's waited so long to become the starting running back somewhere to showcase his talents, and to have this fight himself, not in the same exact spot, because the guys in front of him aren't Arian Foster, but he is just one of 3 guys that are rotating in there right now. And it's funny because when you saw him play against Tennessee, and when he came back from injury, you're thinking, okay, here we go. He's going to become the lead back, and it just hasn't happened that way. Each week they seem to be going to a different way, different back. I don't think that Terrence West, I don't think he's going to be like the feature back the rest of the season. I think you're going to continue to see these guys jockey back and forth for playing time.
I think the fact that he's not playing behind Arian Foster makes it really difficult for him personally this week, because he knows his old team's coming in here and they see him pretty much in the same status he had last time, but behind a rookie now, not a guy as proven as Foster.
Yeah. Well, were his comments out of line, or, was it just a case of a guy saying, look, I want to play? Isn't that kind of what every player wants ultimately?
Yeah, I'm sure that the coaching staff would have rather him just say, look, we're winning right now.
Yeah.
And he did say that in some ways, but he's just a kind of a guy that is just he's kind of a guy that, look, I want to play. That's why I came here to do. I'm disappointed, and you can understand his disappointment.
But he said enough other stuff that you almost forgot that he said it's all about winning.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
true.
I understand how he feels about it, but you could see this one coming a mile away.
Yeah. He also mentioned, I thought it was interesting, the locker room in Houston, how close it was, and the locker room in Cleveland not being like the locker room in Houston. Is that almost a comment that's more, not necessarily concerning that you don't trust the locker room, but a guy saying that as opposed to, I want to play?
I will say this in his defense, and a couple weeks ago after he had the good game against Tennessee, I asked him a question about, I can't remember the context of the question, but he brought that up again. And it was entirely different circumstances, how close that team was. They went bowling a lot together. The year that the course Shaw was out, that this was one of the closest teams he'd ever played with. So that's not that far out of the equation, but again, when he's not playing that much, he probably shouldn't be saying stuff like that.
Yeah. When you look at that running game, of course, Terrence West did start that game against Cincinnati, which again, I think surprised some people. We saw Isaiah Crowell reemerge. Unfortunately, he put the ball on the ground. The play was overturned. Yeah. But, do you think we're going to continue to see West get more carries than Tate? And could we maybe see Crowell start to move ahead of Tate a little bit?
I don't know what we're going to see with the running game, to be honest with you. I do think right now, I don't see any of those guys being the feature back.
Yeah.
I just think they're really going to be going week to week until somebody emerges, and we're 10 weeks into the season, and nobody really has.
And Kyle Shanahan said it a few weeks ago. He likes situations where one back separates himself, and he specifically said no one's done that.
I think their argument would be that until he picks one won't separate themselves.
It's true.
But I understand where he's coming from with this particular group.
Sort of a weird news or note, the Browns' fullback situation continues to kind of go back and forth. They released Ray Agnew a few weeks ago, brought in Kiro Small. Now they're back to Ray Agnew. What's going on with this fullback situation?
I don't know. It was a little surprising to me, especially coming off a 170-yard game. Yeah. They did struggle a couple weeks before that when he was there. It's a very disposable position. It's not quite special teams, but it's very similar in this day and age. There are so few fullbacks out there to begin with. It's not like you carry 2 fullbacks on many rosters unless the guy can do multiple special teams assignments. So it's a bit of a head scratcher, but I wasn't necessarily sure why they got rid of Agnew. So
I mean, how much value, Bud, do you think this coaching staff puts on the fullback position? I mean, of course, we remember, I believe it was Mo Carthon when he was offensive coordinator, liked to throw to his fullback a lot. Unsuccessfully, but he did. Eric Mangini.
Some very crucial third downs, as I remember.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Eric Mangini always seemed like a fullback guy. Do you get that sense from this coaching
Well,
staff?
for as much
that?
commitment as they've made to the run, I mean, even in those games, I look back at those games that they didn't look very good against losing teams. They still tried to run the ball 30 times against Jacksonville, 25 times, I think, against Oakland, 28 against Tampa. So he's never really gotten away from it. So clearly it's an important role on this team, and more so than Norv and Chudzinski certainly paid it.
Yeah. Looking at injuries now, Jordan Cameron, of course, dealing with that concussion, but Tayshaun Gibson, that's a big one if he can't go, because we've seen Barnidge and we've seen Dre step in and maybe not replace Jordan Cameron completely, but they've given you production. If Gibson's out, we're looking at Leonard, Jim Leonard, Jordan Poyer. Is Gibson's injury more concerning at this point than Cameron's?
Absolutely. They've proven they can kind of get by without Cameron because they have been able to make other big plays down the field with their wide receivers.
Yeah.
The 2 other guys, Dre and Barnidge, are just more of 10, 12 yards, catch it, fall over type of guys. But Gibson has played so well. He's playing on a Pro Bowl level, and if he were to miss any significant time, that's a big injury to overcome. Now, Leonard knows the defense probably better than anybody in the organization because he's played for Pettin in so many stops, but he doesn't have that skill level and that ball hawking ability that Tayshaun has.
Yeah. And at least with Leonard, he's a guy who's gotten reps defensively. Jordan Poyer hasn't gotten very many.
9 this year.
Well, we all know how important Pettin believes the secondary is. I mean, he builds his defense from the secondary end. So I think it's a huge. This is a guy who should have his 7th interception, as we all know.
Yeah.
It's probably the easiest one of the year that he didn't handle.
Maybe we know why now.
Yeah, that could be.
Nick McDonald, too. All of a sudden, those center injuries cropping up again. He hasn't played great, but at least you had some continuity on that line. Maybe you can credit that a little bit for the running game getting going. Maybe you can credit Cincinnati for that. But now you might get a shakeup on that line again. How will they replace Nick McDonald if he can't go, and what impact would that have on this line?
Well, I got a sense today, and no one just came blatantly out and said it, although John Greco he expects McDonald to play.
Okay.
But if not, then you're in this whole situation where they may just go to a young kid like Ryan Seymour instead of, when they had to jumble it and move 2 positions and move Greco inside, and they really struggled for placing him at right guard. I think if they were to do it, they might try this Seymour kid at center instead of weakening 2 positions.
How much does it hurt, Bud, to not look? We know Alex Mack is a fantastic player, but like I said, the continuity on the line was kind of getting there again. At least you had guys that were playing together every snap out there, getting used to each other. How much does it hurt to kind of lose that if your backup center now ends up being out?
Well, it does hurt. I mean, what we don't know is whether the line was really coming together or that was the Bengals' defensive flaw or their shortcoming. So it'll be interesting this week to see, but I would expect McDonald to play. And
that offensive line will have to deal with J.J. Watt. How?
Great question.
And maybe Clowney may play too.
Yeah.
He's only played a couple games, but this is a good defense. That's a good defensive line, and to me, he's the best. He is one of the best defensive players I've seen in a long time. And usually, when we think of defensive linemen, we think of just prolific, sack masters. But this guy can do so many things. The one thing that to me would scare the heck out of the coaching staff is how many balls he deflects.
Yeah.
We saw Hoyer have a game. Was that the Jacksonville game where he had like 4 batted down? One of those games in there where he had like 3 or 4 passes deflected. Watt's fantastic at that. And he's talking about ball hawks. I mean, he's all around the ball, interceptions, fumble recoveries. And again, in a low-scoring game, if it ends up that way, the weather's not supposed to be that great on Sunday, he's a serious, serious concern.
And not a guy that you can really neutralize by running at him.
Yeah.
Some of those guys that get up the field or pass rush and they give up they give up in run defense, and he's not one of them.
And he's a guy that has a nose for the end zone, too.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some defenders that just, when they get the ball in their hands, they have a nose for that end
And
zone.
we're talking about a defensive
Yeah,
lineman.
usually those guys are like Ed Reed or...
Right, those are safeties. This guy is just, and you don't know where he's going to line up, so it's not like you can say, okay, he's going to be here. He was talking about that today. He's going to be all over the place, and why not when you have a weapon like that?
One of the questions, and maybe this is something that'll be easier to address on next week's show, but as you look at Josh Gordon getting closer and closer to coming back, you kind of start to look at the wide receiving group. And I don't know that this would have been a discussion back in week 1, but a lot of guys have played really well in this wide receiving group. So who do you think, maybe doesn't become the odd man out, but who do you think loses their snaps?
I'm surprised at that press conference, Ray Farmer didn't say, well, who would I cut? Who would I waive to put Josh on? I'm not sure he can make our team. I don't know. I think it's a great question. I'm curious what your take was on Farmer's sort of downplaying
we didn't get
the
to
Gordon,
that last week.
like the immediate impact he might make.
Yeah, he's going back in the lineup. There's no question why. And I think the most interesting part of it is what I'm writing about this for this weekend is I can't remember around the league losing a premier receiver like this. Someone mentioned to me when the 49ers lost Jerry Rice for a big chunk of one season, this guy named Terrell Owens surfaced, and he wasn't too bad. Now, there's no Terrell Owens on that group, but it's amazing what that group has done without him, because I think we all agreed when we heard Ray Farmer talking in the preseason, like, I'm confident that we're going to be okay at receivers. Like, yeah, right. That they've been very good. And to answer your question, I don't know. All of those guys have contributed.
Yeah.
I mean, the Rabbit can't catch a fair punt or a fair catch on a punt, but he's making all these grabs all over the place.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Miles Austin seems to make one big catch every
On third down, on third and long every game.
I don't know how he does it, but every single game there's one big catch.
I was in Minnesota, as you were last year, when Gordon came back and had the unbelievable game. But then again, he only missed 2 weeks then.
Yeah.
This is I wasn't a math major in college, but I think this is 5 times as long, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, this could be, maybe maybe Farmer's just trying to be realistic about this and saying, hey, this guy's missed 2.5 months. I wouldn't expect him to walk back in here and be an all-pro. Yeah. Or maybe he understands that it's a much different offense that spreads the ball around this year as opposed to throwing it up for Gordon.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be, some rust he's got to knock off, but it's good to be Brian Hoyer. I can say that with him coming back. And
he certainly weathered that storm, didn't he?
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, who would ever thought he'd still have the starting quarterback job at week 10 when Gordon came back?
Absolutely.
And I would have thought this team would be,
Yeah.
They won't be 6-3 when he comes back. They'll be either 7-3 or 6-4. But
We wouldn't have bet
thought
either.
they'd be where they are.
No way.
And you're doing it without giving anything up, too. I think it's almost like you're making a trade. After the trade deadline, you're bringing in an elite player. Again, it's hard to find a situation where something like this has happened.
It really is, and credit all those guys. Again, they've all contributed in their own little way, and of course the quarterback spreading the ball around, like you mentioned. I don't think any of those guys are among the league leaders. The only category that any of them are in is Taylor Gabriel with yards per catch. We talk about being able yards after catch and the big plays, but other than that, I think you have to get into the 20s to find any of those guys as far as reception leaders or yardage leaders.
I can't do a show without talking about Taylor Gabriel because I like the guy so much. But, I've seen some folks suggest this. Should Taylor Gabriel maybe get some consideration in the punt return game?
Anybody right now. I mean, I don't know what his background is as far as, I know that he was, I can't remember if he was a kick returner or a punt returner in preseason. In preseason, because he did. It runs in my mind he had a couple decent returns.
He did have a couple
preseason.
kick returns.
So but that's a different world. There's very few guys that do both. So I don't know. Another guy I heard was pretty good at it. This is secondhand. Was Quan Williams. Okay. Now he's had some injury issues. I don't know if they would risk him because they like him so much in the secondary.
Yeah, I mean, not just injury issues, but concussion issues as
Concussion, neck injury, stinger. I mean, I don't know how that little guy's playing as much as he is.
Yeah. Well, Gabriel's the Appalachian. No, where's he from? Aberlin Christian, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I know he returned punts there, and I know that's a little bit different level of football than the NFL. But I would certainly, at this point in the season, try him. I mean, you have to get more. I know they've made it work. They've gotten, not lucky, but they've gotten past that one area of weakness on their team. But it could be so much easier for the offense if they could just do something with the punt return.
It's cost them 2 games. It's really played a factor in the Baltimore loss and then the game in Jacksonville where, everyone looks at that 24-6, they were blown out. 7 minutes left, it's a 6-point or 5-point ball game, and they lose the fumble. And don't forget in the Tennessee game where they were fortunate to get a call where Benjamin fumbled and lost the ball, but they said the guy went out of bounds.
Yeah.
So they have really been skating. They've gotten away with a lot on that punt return.
And even against Cincinnati, it kind of gets buried because of the blowout win. But Jim Leonard had his issues as well, kind of getting away from that designated catcher role and actually trying to return kicks. Okay, guys, you'll have your picks in print on Sunday, so I won't hold you to what you say here. But right now, how are you feeling about this game Sunday?
Well, I think I'm picking them around 24-13, somewhere around there. I just think it's going to be a tough environment. We now know that there is a home field advantage in this stadium. I didn't know that for 15 years or so. I think it's a tough environment for a quarterback to walk in, especially a guy who's not the most mobile guy in the world, and find a way to figure out this defense. So I think they're going to pick them off. I think there are going to be turnovers, and I think they'll be able to run the ball again.
Tom?
I'm picking the Browns as well. I think I already made my pick. I think 17-16, something like that. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game. I think the Browns will have trouble themselves moving the ball, but I agree with Bud that you would have to think that they can turn over Mallett a couple times in this game, either by fumbles, strip sacks, or interceptions, and that should be enough.
All right, Browns-Texans on Sunday. It's a 1 o'clock kickoff. We'll have complete coverage, as always, at cleveland.com/Browns. And, of course, you can watch our show every Wednesday night, 7:30. If you missed any of this show, we'll have the archive up shortly, also at cleveland.com/Browns. For Bud Shaw, Tom Reed, I'm Dan Labbe.